I could list my story in a nutshell and what I've been through, and even since I've been saved. And a lot of Christians would go, what? Because they wouldn't be able to believe it because of what they see. This is Christianity. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, you couldn't tell they were in the fire. But they were. I bet they were passionate. I bet they were convinced. I bet you when they came out of that fire, they were like, ah! And you say, calm down, preacher. I don't think you understand. You give Shadrach a microphone. Let me ask you this. Was Jesus interested in putting out Nebuchadnezzar's fire? Our whole prayer is that the trouble goes away. His whole desire is that you manifest him and surrender in the midst of the fire. That you keep your eyes on the only truth. For Jesus to put out the fire would be given the fire power. He just stood in the middle of it, and his boys are bound hand and foot. He just doesn't even put out the fire. He just makes them free in the middle of it. And we think the trouble has to go away. And he's saying, stop identifying through what you're going through. Identify through what I've been through, because there's a higher truth there to walk you through everything. And that had such an impact on Nebuchadnezzar that he went totally crazy opposite of where he was. Anybody that doesn't bow to me and my image is going into the fire. Then they say, anybody that doesn't bow to these guys, God's going into the fire. I mean, he took it a little too far, but that's pretty intense response. I'm fascinated by the story too. I'm just fascinated by the story. It's one of my favorite Old Testament stories. Because the two servants, the guards, took them down to the furnace. They fired it up hot, 7 times hotter. They like an urgent decree, piping hot. They opened the door. What happened to the 2 servants? Toasty bacon, like boom, done, crispy. Right? Ash, like consumed. Okay, so you got 3 Hebrew boys there bound, head to foot. They're bound, head to foot. They're bound completely, head to foot. And both the guys that are gonna put them in the oven are dust piles. How'd they get in? Jesus. And you think he's supposed to keep you out of the fire. There's no other way they're getting in there. I'm just picturing Jesus going, this is gonna be great. This is a story that's gonna go down for the ages. Boom. And then he jumps in behind them and shows up as the 4th, like the Son of God. Right? And they're like, hey, didn't we only put 3 in? But there's 4. I love Veggie Tales. Hey, boss, did we put 3 men in that furnace? Yeah. A big old pickle? Yeah. He says, my little granddaughter grew up watching that. She would be watching at me every time, because when the light bursts out of the furnace, did you ever see it? And the light comes out of the windows, I start crying every time. Veggie Tales, dude, I cry. It's so powerful. And my little granddaughter's sitting there looking at me, waiting for me to cry. She's watching and she knows we're at the part. And I already know it's coming, so I'm already. And it's pickles and cucumbers and stuff. It's like squash. But there's truth there, and it just, yeah. He says, yeah. He says, well, boss, there's 4 in there now, and the 1 is really shiny. Oh, Shaq, Rack, Benny, come out of there. Who can tell I watched it? Isn't it amazing? What a revelation that Jesus didn't put out the fire. We're notorious for the trial going away. We're actually praying for no fire all the time. thinking that's prayer. Why not be prepared for whatever comes? Form me, mold me, shape me in the world, not of the world. Come hell or high water, empower me to shine in the face of it all so people see Christ in my life in the middle of the trial, so the trial never becomes my identity, my life, how I'm doing, who I am, because Christ in me is the hope of glory. Come on. You know what the number one prayer request I've seen concerning health and wholeness is? Hey, I'm going to the doctor. Pray that I get a good report. You already have a good report. You know why that's our prayer request? Because we know whatever we hear is going to move us, and now we have to deal with whatever we hear. So the highest prayer is pray I get a good report. Who shall believe our report? For to who is the arm of the Lord revealed? Yeah? Come on. Most of the time, the report moves us. And you get told you have this and this, and it's going to this and this, and you don't even realize you're doing it. It's not an evil thing. It's an unrealized thing. You take on the identity of what you were told and what you're stepping into and going through, and you put on that identity, and you start asking for prayer from the position of a person in trouble, and you lose sight of the fact that you've never stepped out of covenant where God's concerned. Are you with me? I love that Shaq story, man. Shaq, rap, Benny, come out of there. Bible says their clothes weren't burned, their hair wasn't singed. You get your hair this far from a gas burner. I just did it the other day. I was canning, and I had the fire on high, and I'm doing my tomatoes. I'm a farmer, man. Believe me, I love farming, man. I'm just a farmer. I can all kinds of stuff. And I'm in there, I got my little pressure canner rattling, and I've got my tomatoes are done, and I lift them up. I'm getting them off that burner, and my arm went across, and I just said, ooh, I smelled that. I was this high above it, and it singed my hairs. And I'm like, yep, got me. Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego were in a 7-time hotter furnace than they ever, and their hair wasn't singed. So what's the whole point of the story? Whether they're going in the fire or not, whether God's going to stop Nebuchadnezzar or whether they're going to go in or not. See, we think when we're going down to the furnace wrapped that's midnight hour, and we're thinking, man, God, you can't let this happen. That didn't have the point of the story at all. It wasn't about whether they went in the fire or not. It's about what they're going to believe and what they're going to bow to. We better get this stuff out of these Bible stories, because we're thinking, nobody's ever going to be able to do that to me. I ain't going in no fire. Jesus will keep me from the fire. He'll show up right at midnight. 12th ding of the bell, man, he's coming. That was not, Shadrach and Meshach and them weren't standing there going, ooh, it got really hot. It felt like, did them two guys just get burned? Because I think they were wrapped head to foot. I don't think they could even see. I think the way they did things was head to toe. They just had them bound the whole way. And they're just standing there like this. I mean, they go down like this. Burned. The whole point of the story was never whether they went in or not. Ain't that something? You see the power of loving not your own life unto death? Don't hear me harsh. When we ask each other how we're doing, we almost always say the 2 biggest trials and keep me in prayer. Almost always. A friend just recently said, I stopped asking Christians how they're doing because the answers are always painful. Well, I mean, I'm getting by. We're this, and we're going through this right now, and we're this and this. And what it gives away is, I'm not nitpicking. Hear me out. Be patient with me. What it gives away is we're deciding who we are and how we are by how it's going. And we're determining if our faith is working and not by whether we're going in the furnace or not. And none of those things have anything to do with the measure of your faith. Stuff's going to happen to every one of us. Peter said, don't think it's strange. You look at Paul's list. Paul had quite a list of trials. Quite a list. I mean, how many people do you know that you ever went out evangelizing with that got stoned, and when they woke back up from the power of God said, well, let's get back in that city? No, here's what we do. Hey, it's really riled up in there. We're just going to take, hey, you got to use wisdom, brother. Got to use wisdom, brother. One day we're going to stand before the Lord and find out how many moves of God were stopped by the phrase, we got to use wisdom. Because it wasn't God's wisdom, it was men's intellect, knowledge, or fear. I've been told in my personal life by men I've respected that know my life behind the scenes and personal, that try to give me counsel in certain trials and say, well, now, brother, you got to use wisdom, and I'll call them on it every time. I say, you're only saying that because you validly care for me and you're concerned for me right now. You're not saying that because you think it's wise. It's because you're concerned for me, and you don't think I have the same level of concern for myself. I call them on it every time. Okay.